The bell tolls at midnight. Greetings. I'd like to welcome all of my midnight marauders. Come on in, get comfy, and lend me your imagination. There's a mirror on the wall eliciting warnings before your fall. Failure to change your toxic ways will reveal your truth in just 3 days. I call this midnight tale the inner mirror. Lola jumped across the table, grabbing at the old woman's throat. Her breath was heaving and her mouth drooled as she growled at the old woman, saying, "I'll kill you, you old witch. You don't know who you're messing with." The ringmaster pulled Lola off and tossed her aside. She jumped up and ran out of the tent and fell to the ground as her legs and arms began to contort and retract into the size of a toddler's. A crowd gathered around to laugh and cheer at the unbelievable mastery of a magician's trick of the century, morphing a grown woman into an infant right before their very eyes. This trick would appear to be his last, as the ringmaster and his entire carnival seemed to have disappeared overnight. 24-year-old Fontaine Baptiste awoke in bed at her New Orleans condo, wearing a silky pink foo-foo cashmere gown. Her hair was in a perfect wrap with a rose-colored bonnet to match. Her skin was a sun-kissed, milk chocolatey golden brown. She had a beauty mark on the right side of her mouth and her eyelashes perfectly curled. She stretched out her perfectly manicured hands and yawned ever so lightly while patting her mouth. She gently pulled her white fluffy covers back and sauntered out of bed to a cushy white bathroom with fresh white flowers in a large vase on the gold-lined sink, and began her morning-long ritual of skincare and potions. Polished and immaculately groomed, Fontaine Baptiste called her friend Jontenay to go to a carnival in town at Grover's Park. "Hey, girl," Fontaine said as Jontenay picked up the phone. "I know you don't have any plans today, so pick me up tonight at 6, okay?" "Oh, hey, Fontaine," Jontenay replied as her voice dropped, sounding less than enthused upon hearing Fontaine's voice on the other end of the telephone. But before Jontenay could even tell Fontaine that she had actually made plans to go to the carnival with another friend already, she heard a dial tone. It was 12 noon, and Fontaine was in a photo shoot for Sultry magazine. There were several fashion models to be featured in this particular magazine, but Fontaine wasn't at all excited due to the fact that some of them were a bit on the curvy side. Fontaine, being the tall, thin body perfectionist that she was, didn't hesitate to call out Eliza Coney as she stood there in her white form-fitting dress saying, "Wow, Eliza, that dress fits you like a glove. Too bad that those types of dresses show every bulge and imperfection a girl has. Huh? Don't you just hate that?" Eliza abruptly looked down at her tummy to see a nice round little bulge, making her feel uncomfortable as her focus became all about what's not considered beautiful. Suddenly, Eliza walked off the set and into her dressing room where she bawled for 2 hours before finally agreeing to come back and finish her contracted photo shoot with Sultry magazine. The other plus-size models all decided to wait on taking their photo shoots until Fontaine finished hers and left the premises. 6 p.m. rolled around, and Jontenay was promptly out front of Fontaine's house to pick her up after telling her other friend, Shelby, that she'd just meet her at the carnival. Fontaine approached Jontenay's car with a nasty look on her face, saying with a laugh, "Girl, do you ever wash this bucket of yours?" A steaming Jontenay completely ignored the rude comment and uttered under her breath, "This witch." As Fontaine got out of the bucket, as she likes to call any car that's not a luxury vehicle, she was drawn to the first tent she saw with a tall and very mysterious-looking ringmaster in front shouting, Come one, come all, look into Madame Evelyn's mirror if you dare. It will reveal your inner truth to you and the rest of the world. Fontaine quickly squeezed in front of Jontenay, who stood in line before her, and very self-assuredly exclaimed, "I'll take my chances." Fontaine walked inside of the tent where little old Madame Evelyn sat at a table. Fontaine sat down at the table across from her. She looked around and noticed bottles of what appeared to be small animal carcasses and serpents submerged in some sort of liquid. Creepy little doll souvenir figures hung from strings in the corner of the tent, while strong, stifling incense and candles burned on another small table. Fontaine handed Madame Evelyn the $10 minimum, which was the cost to look into the mirror. Of course, she complained about the price. Madame Evelyn matter-of-factly asked, "Now are you certain you wish to look into the mirror, my child? Your truth will be revealed for all the world to see." An overly confident Fontaine replied, "Sure. I mean, what's the worst that could happen?" Madame Evelyn smiled with a sinister grin, displaying broken brown teeth as her century-old hands flipped a tiny hourglass filled with sand upside down and placed it on a shelf behind her, alongside other tiny hourglasses that had been flipped in the same manner, and said, "Look into the glass, child." No sooner than the old woman placed the mirror on the table, Fontaine noticed it had markings around the wood. Nonetheless, Fontaine flashed her pearly whites as if she was back at a photo shoot taking pictures. That smile abruptly changed as she began to see images flashing before her eyes in the mirror that caused her to rear back in horror and scream while running out of the tent and back to the car, while a concerned Jontenay followed. "What the hell happened in there, Fontaine?" said a noticeably curious Jontenay. "Nothing, just take me home. I'll talk to you tomorrow," said a terrified and angry-looking Fontaine. Jontenay dropped Fontaine off at her house and sped off quickly, irritated at her friend's rude behavior once again. Fontaine began to immediately revisit the images in her mind as she got ready for bed. She first decided to make herself a snack, feeling famished as she tore through her refrigerator, devouring anything that wasn't nailed down. After a 2-hour binge-eating session, she then painstakingly limped to her white and fluffy bathroom to throw up everything she had just spent the last 2 hours eating, but nothing came up. However, there was nothing, not even a burp, which had Fontaine in a panic about weight gain. The next day, she noticed huge bumps forming on her chin and dark blotches on her face. She immediately began her hour-long skin regimen, but to no avail as the dark blotches on her face had gotten worse within an hour. Fontaine called Jontenay but didn't get an answer, as an annoyed Jontenay just let the phone ring upon seeing Fontaine's name across her phone screen. She no longer wanted to be bothered with her. A frantic Fontaine sat in the room with the lights off when she heard a sinister laugh say, "You have one day left, my child, and your truth will be revealed for all the world to see." Suddenly she heard the doorbell ring. It was Jontenay, who put aside her frustration with Fontaine and decided to check on her since she hadn't really heard much from her since ignoring her calls 2 days ago. She was curious as to what exactly happened to Fontaine in that old tent at the carnival, which had packed up and left to go set up in another location out of state, and friend told Jontenay. Upon walking in the house, Jontenay smelled spoilage coming from the kitchen area with food spread out across the kitchen counter. This was unsettling to Jontenay, as she knew how immaculate Fontaine usually kept her home. Jontenay hurried upstairs with her heart beating fast and burst open Fontaine's room door. Inside the dark room was a figure sitting in the corner with their head down. Jontanay called out, "Fontaine, are you okay?" She got no reply. Jontanay inched over to the curtains and pulled them back, and what she saw caused her heart to skip a beat. There in the corner sat a round, portly, balding, acne-ridden woman who held no resemblance to her friend she accompanied 3 days ago. "Oh my God, Fontaine, is that you?" a crazed and wide-eyed Jontanay asked. The horrific-looking woman looked up and with a defeated-sounding response said, "The mirror brought what was on the inside, outside." With tears streaming down her face and desolation in her eyes, Fontaine asked Jontanay in the most anguished voice,
"So, how do I look?"
37-year-old fitness influencer, consultant gym owner, and CEO Stoney Stacksworth jumped out of bed in his California ranch-style home, eager to make himself a protein shake with about 10 eggs in it and a heaping bowl of steamed oats with organic honey and blueberries on top. It was another charged day for Stoney, as he was laying out plans to continue growing his ever-expanding made-of-stone 24/7 gym. "Top of the morning," Stoney said loudly while sitting at the breakfast table to his enervated wife, Griselle, who stayed up all night with their crying 5-month-old daughter, Lindsay, who was teething and extremely uncomfortable. Griselle looked his way with a glower expression, yet responded hastily, but noticed he was on the phone with a client, dismissively focusing all of his attention on the call and scarfing down what was left of his steamed oats. "I gotta go, honey," Stoney said to Griselle. "But make sure you do those sit-ups and hit the Stairmaster today for at least an hour when you get Lindsay down for her nap, okay? You should be able to reach your goal by the Christmas party that the guys and I are throwing at the gym this year. We both know you wouldn't love anything more than fitting back into that red dress of yours that you wore at Perry's birthday party last year. I'll call you later." Stoney blew her and Lindsay a kiss while exiting the front door. He stopped at a small vitamin shop right down the street from his gym that looked kinda tucked away near a back alley, and a large muscular man greeted him at the counter. "Hey, what's up, Stoney?" said the large muscular man. "Hey, Roger, you got the stuff, man?" an anxious Stoney replied. "Absolutely." Roger locked the door and proceeded to walk towards the back of the store. "Right back here, bro," Roger said. The two men stepped behind a dark curtain, and Roger unlocked a cabinet door, and there, on every shelf set dozens of vials of performance-enhancing steroids, to which he looked at Stoney and said, "Gang's all here, bro." Stoney smiled and paid his PED supplier for his gear and promptly left the store, making sure to be very discreet about his business dealings with the store owner. Stoney arrived at the gym at 12 noon, walked right by his hard-working staff members, Carlos and Steve, who enthusiastically greeted him with wide smiles as he arrogantly yelled at them to kick it up a notch and rein in the results. His already overworked, underpaid staff were eager to rein in the results by loudly telling their clients to "Come on, step it up, people." Stoney slipped into the restroom and gave himself a shot of adrenaline, then proceeded to loudly rule the gym floor, hurling instructions and insults at some of the overweight clients struggling to keep up with his steroid-fueled, unrealistic pace. After the client's excruciating workout, Stoney called his wife and said, "Honey, I'm on my way home. I'm going to stop by the supermarket to pick up a few items. Can I get you anything?" Stoney left the gym and headed out, saying his goodbyes to Carlos and Steve, also adding, "Hey guys, just reminding you that we practice what we preach, okay? So hit that iron a little harder and give the people what they're paying for, all right? I'm just saying." Carlos and Steve both shot a peaked look in the direction of Stoney before agreeing and continuing to train. Stoney jumped in his Maserati and headed towards the store to get Lindsay teething cream and himself more eggs for his breakfast in the morning. On his way to the store, he noticed a brightly lit carnival in the wide open field next to the supermarket and decided to go check out the festivities. Stoney walked up to the entrance as the carnival ringmaster stood beside a tent and blared an advertisement from his microphone, exclaiming, "Come one, come all. Look into Madame Evelyn's mirror if you dare. It will reveal your inner truth to you and the rest of the world." Stoney laughed loudly and belligerently said, "My inner truth, huh? Well, my truth is a body like the Rock of Gibraltar. There's some truth for that ass." Stoney got in line, and before he knew it, he was up next. He entered the tent where Madame Evelyn sat at a table. He sat across from her and said, "Hey, Miss Evelyn, I'm Stoney. Pleased to meet you," as he stretched out his hand. "Madame Evelyn," she corrected Stoney as a slight annoyance loomed over her face. $10, please." Stoney reached in his wallet, retrieved the $10, and set it on the table beside Madame Evelyn's badly wrinkled and twisted hand. She pulled the mirror from underneath the table drawer and sat it directly in front of Stoney. Madame Evelyn grimaced at Stoney and whispered in a low, sinister voice, "Look into the mirror," as she turned his 3-day hourglass upside down. A petrified Stoney began sweating profusely while staring into the mirror. He took his powerful hand and flipped over the table with the mirror still on top of it while yelling, "What type of disgusting scam are you running here, old lady?" Stoney stood up, clearly disturbed, and hurried out of the tent and back to his car, but not before telling the ringmaster what he thought about his little trick mirror that Madame Evelyn had him look into. "Screw all of you weirdos!" Stoney yelled. Stoney pulled up to the grocery store parking lot, parked his car, and began seeing images of what the mirror had revealed to him when he looked into it. He shook his head wildly, mumbling, "I'm hitting the gym extra hard tomorrow, bro." Stoney made it home where Grizel and Lindsay were fast asleep. He sat at the kitchen table and felt oddly tired. He forced himself up from the table and into the shower where he was barely able to groom himself before retiring to bed. He made sure not to disturb his wife Grizel with the strange occurrences he'd just experienced at the carnival, knowing how tired she's been due to a fussy Lindsay teething and constant crying. He lay in bed awake, but ultimately soon drifted off to sleep. Stoney tossed and turned all night from the images that kept playing over and over again in his head like a scary movie. Dawn peeked through the curtains in his bedroom, and the light in his eyes caused him to toss and turn himself awake. He felt restless and a bit off. Grizel and Lindsay were already in the kitchen laughing and enjoying the morning. An exhausted Stoney walked into the restroom, past the full-length mirror to the sink, and noticed a depleted-looking guy staring back at him in the mirror. Stoney looked down at his arms and noticed veiny, loose skin with a pale grayish undertone and gaunt, hollowed cheekbones with dark circles under his eyes like something right out of a zombie movie. Stoney leaned up to the mirror and touched the glass and then his biceps. Never mind his gaunt, thin face. All he could see was his depleted muscles. "What the?" whispered Stoney. He backed up, looking down at his loose pajamas that hung off of his body. His eyes stretched to capacity as he ran to the closet and grabbed an old overcoat that was now 3 sizes too big and threw it on. He grabbed his keys and headed out the front door, with Grizel looking on in SAH as he ran right past her and Lindsay without so much as a good morning. He darted out of the front door. Stoney, who couldn't stop looking down at his horribly malnourished frame, jumped in his Maserati, revved the engine, and took off speeding down the street. He recklessly maneuvered in and out of lanes down the highway, desperately trying to get back to the carnival. He intended to confront Madame Evelyn about this gaunt figure that he'd seen in her mirror looking back at him, now realizing it was his own image. He slammed on his brakes as he arrived, his eyes widened upon seeing no sign of the carnival where it once was. He jumped out of the car with his coat blowing in the wind. He balled his fist tightly and with all his might bent forward and shouted, "No!" Tears ran down Stoney's face as he saw all his years of hard work gone within days. He slowly got back into his car and drove to his gym where he parked recklessly. He flung the car door open and jumped out, leaving the engine still running. He walked into the gym and passed his staff who failed to recognize him. They immediately ran towards him, wondering who was this man trespassing on their premises and walking directly to the back office. Steve, still unable to recognize Stoney, put his hand on Stoney's shoulder and said, "Hey man, don't make me toss you out on your bony ass, okay?" Carlos slowly approached the now skeletal Stoney, realizing he looked familiar, and exclaimed, "Hey man, hey Stoney, is that you? My God, man, what happened to you?" Stoney looked up with sunken eyes and loose skin now hanging off his entire body, and with a frail voice said, "The mirror brought what was on the inside outside. How do I look?" 59-year-old esthetician, shop founder and owner Phyllis Periwinkle sat at her vanity desk. Her eyes were fixed upon her mirror as she admired her own looks. Phyllis was an absolute beauty. She was tall and statuesque with jet black hair and the smoothest skin any mature woman of 40-plus years old could ever hope for. After taking another 30 minutes to bask in her own glorious vanity, Phyllis prepared for her day's work. Phyllis arrived promptly at her esthetician shop, Glassy Glow Skincare, on Ritzy Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. She was the first one there and opened the doors to her posh, aesthetically pleasing but quaint establishment and began setting up for her 9 a.m. appointment with Miss Elaine Belford, the wife of Boris von Belford III. Boris was the sole proprietor of A Hole in One, a golf equipment company that he inherited from his father, Boris Charles Belford II, after he died of strange circumstances 2 years ago while on safari in Zambia. Phyllis made sure that all the towels were in the warmers and the temperature was set between 120 and 140 Fahrenheit to maintain a comfortable, soothing warmth. In 30 minutes, her young staff, Daphne Arlington and Oconee, would be arriving to prepare for their clients and set the relaxing mood with eucalyptus oil diffusers and soothing peppermint candles. In walked Daphne, a gossiping mood ruiner that worked at table 2, right next to Oconee. Oconee, a beautiful esthetician who's still in school getting her license working part-time in the shop, arrived right behind Daphne. Daphne was a horrible morning person and never had much to say before noon. On the other hand, Oconee was sweet and attentive with a wonderful personality and a sense of humor to match that brought a beautiful energy to mornings. Miss Belford entered the shop dressed in a pair of blue jeans and a sweater with a designer Birkin bag and a pair of tennis shoes. "Sorry, I'm late," she yelled while seemingly out of breath. She went on a tangent about the kids, the household projects, 5-star haute cuisine, and more. Phyllis hung on to every word that rippled out of Mrs. Belford's rich mouth. Phyllis longed for the chance to be surrounded by such elite company, considering that Phyllis was an absolute neanamorphic, or in other words, someone who appeared to look a hell of a lot younger than their actual age. Just the other day, Daphne told Phyllis that she heard through the grapevine that Elaine was at least 30 years younger than Boris. 12 noon rolled around and it was time to close up shop for lunch. So Phyllis put in her phone order at Lucy's Sandwiches on the other side of town and sent both girls to go pick it up. As soon as both girls leave the shop, Phyllis retreated to the basement of the shop, where only she had a key, and deposited the bulk of the morning's discretionary income for herself while peeling a measly few hundred to pay the girls their weekly salaries. Suddenly, the shop's doorbell began ringing, and a startled Phyllis. She promptly closed the basement safe, set the alarm code, and padlocked the basement door. She hurried up the stairs, peeped through the blinds, and noticed it was her longtime customer, Stacy Johnson. Phyllis unlocked the door. "Hey, Phyllis, did you forget about me again?" Stacy playfully asked. "No, girl, I was just downstairs taking care of some business is all," Phyllis responded. "Same treatment today?" Phyllis added. "Absolutely," said Stacy. Phyllis was finishing up with Stacy as the girls returned, and all excited that a carnival was in town. Stacy paid and left the shop. Phyllis noticed that the girls were excited and asked why. They told her that a carnival was coming to town. Oconee said that she'd heard that the carnival's fortune teller was amazing, and she heard that her readings were super accurate. Just then, Daphne said, "Hey, we should go, Phyllis." A smile developed across Phyllis's face, imagining her fortune of wealth and meeting someone with a bank account the size of a stadium. The ladies decided to stop for drinks at Dillinger's pub first, to toss back a couple of shots, then hit the carnival. The girls were enjoying themselves at the bar, and while there they ran into an older woman named Lark that used to work at the shop with Phyllis. However, she quit due to a disagreement they had about money, amongst a few other things. Needless to say, she still held resentment for Phyllis, and stumbled over to her table inebriated and bitter, saying, "Are you still using sunflower oil in the low-income clients' products to cause breakouts so they'll unsuspectingly keep coming back to you for help, huh? Hey girls, did you know she has a vault full of cash and pays you crumbs at the end of the week?" Daphne looked at Phyllis and said, "Tell me she's lying?" Phyllis looked away and chugged her shot. An upset Daphne grabbed her jacket off the back of the chair, grabbed Oconee's hand, and they both left without saying another word to Phyllis. Phyllis laughed while yelling, "Both of you are a dime a dozen, just like this old washed-up bar-hoping bitter old fool." Phyllis then turned her attention to Lark and yelled, "You happy, Lark?" Lark winked at Phyllis and stumbled out of the bar and into the darkness. Phyllis, on the other hand, was determined to check out the carnival that seemed to be just minutes from the bar. She managed to drive herself there, even though drinking and driving had never been something she'd done on the regular. When she arrived, she was awestruck, looking at all the bright lights and taking in all of the sounds, including the ringmaster saying, "Come one, come all. Look into Madame Evelyn's mirror if you dare. It will reveal your truth to you and the rest of the world." A tipsy Phyllis walked up to the tent, and strangely, there was no one in line, which she thought was a sign, and perhaps it was. Suddenly, without seeing her, Madame Evelyn said, "Come on in, my child." Phyllis walked inside, saying, "How did you know I was out there?" Madame Evelyn retorted, "I know a lot of things, some seen and some unseen." Phyllis handed Madame Evelyn her $10 as she pulled the mirror from underneath the table drawer and said, "Look into the mirror," as she then turned over Phyllis's hourglass. Phyllis stared into the mirror and reacted as if she was being electrocuted. All of a sudden, her head dropped, and the sound of water hitting the rug exposed Phyllis, having, let's just say, an elderly senior incontinent accident. Phyllis awoke to Madame Evelyn holding a cool compress to her forehead. She smacked it away, noticing that her pants were wet. Noticeably embarrassed, Phyllis struggled up to her feet and quickly tore out of the tent and back to her car. The next day, Phyllis did not go into work as she felt sore and tired. She tried to contact Daphne to no avail. As a matter of fact, Daphne left a few choice words on her answering machine about telling her financially deficient clients that Phyllis had been making sure they have to keep coming back by causing their breakouts. Phyllis then called Oconee. Oconee answered immediately and said, "I've been worried about you. Are you okay?" Phyllis felt relieved hearing Oconee's kind voice, who reassured her that she'd look over the shop until Phyllis was back on her feet. 2 days passed, and Oconee called to tell Phyllis that Mrs. Belford wanted to come in and get a facial for a wedding, and Phyllis was invited. Phyllis dropped the phone as Oconee could hear coughing and gurgling in the background. This prompted Oconee to immediately go to Phyllis's house. Upon her arrival, Oconee noticed that the front door was unlocked and there were adult diapers on the living room table. Oconee called out to Phyllis and again heard coughing and mumbling in the master bedroom. Oconee opened the bedroom door and she was frozen with absolute fear as she gazed in terror at what looked like a 100-year-old wrinkled woman in an infantile stage with a soaked diaper and beddings. Oconee walked over to Phyllis and said, "We knew you'd take the bait. You see, Lark is my mother's best friend, and she knew you'd want your fortune told upon mentioning Madame Evelyn's ability. But what you didn't know is that the mirror brings what's on the inside, outside. Thanks for the shop, Phyllis. I'll take it from here." Phyllis began to mumble frantically, sounding almost too ineligible to understand. As Oconee got closer, Phyllis turned her ancient-looking face that resembled a road map and desperately asked, How do I look?"